Okay, we're going to talk about Gothic architecture a little bit, and then we're going to watch our video on it. The Gothic was originally a derogatory term coined by the later 16th century art historian Giorgio Vasari. Vasari is going to use the term Gothic as one as ridiculing late medieval art and architecture. For him, it was monstrous and barbarous, invented by the Goths, thus the term Gothic, the people who he blamed for destroying classical civilization of the Roman Empire. Of course, Vasari was a man of the Renaissance when the classical world was prized above all others. At the time, the architectural form was called opus modernum, or modern work, or also sometimes opus francigenium, or French work. The Gothic was basically centered in Northern Europe, and the Gothic period dates loosely from about the 12th century to the 14th century, which was a time of a great population explosion. Okay? Basically, the population of Europe is going to quadruple in that time. Well, from about early on 600, there's going to be 14 million people living in Western Europe. By 1300, there's going to be 73 million people. So a huge population explosion over the course of the period we've been looking at, or the Middle Ages, and then this population will double between the 10th and the 14th century. One of the new innovations, or a major change of the period is going to be the development of urban centers, where we're going to have basically cities, large cities are going to emerge. And this is going to be a major change, particularly in church architecture, which previously we have pilgrimage churches along the great pilgrimage routes, like Saint-Cernin, like Moissac, which were relatively isolated. What we're going to see in the Gothic period are these large churches, which are going to be kind of the center of new urban environments. Urban cathedrals, like most famously Notre Dame, will be built during this time. They are going to serve as seats for the wealthy ruling bishops, as well as an increasing middle-class patronage. We're also going to see during this time in these urban centers the rise of the first universities are going to occur. The first university will emerge in Bologna, but by the 11th century there will also be these universities or educational centers in Paris, Cambridge, and Oxford. So this is a real shift from the Romanesque period and before, where we had monasteries being isolated monasteries being the center of education. Interestingly, in terms of the Romanesque period informing the Gothic in terms of education, where we have, through these armed crusades going into the Middle East, new access to classical literature and ideas. And this is going to be carried back, and we're going to see a profound influence of the classical philosopher Aristotle occur during this Gothic period. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher who wrote books on politics, poetics, and metaphysics. He was basically a student of Plato. We know Plato's works through Aristotle, and he was also the personal tutor to Alexander the Great. Aristotle promoted an idea of rational inquiry rather than faith as a means of understanding truth. Okay, and this would seem basically incompatible with Christian ideas and concepts, which is a religion based on faith and also through a personal union and connection with God. This is called mysticism, and this was the prevailing sentiment through the Middle Ages. What is going to happen in the Middle Ages, or in this Gothic period, is the 13th century scholar St. Thomas Aquinas who was an Italian monk who was studying at this University of Paris, is going to basically bring together the classical ideas and concepts of Aristotle based on a rational investigation of the world with the Christian kind of mystic tradition. And what he's going to do in his philosophy, which is going to be called scholasticism, is he is going to present a central idea of Christianity, or like the role of God in the world, one that is basically mystical at heart, and he is going to answer the question by presenting two different arguments and then kind of rationally debating the existence of God. In this way, he is going to kind of alter the way that Christian dogma is thought about and discussed from that way forward by synthesizing this kind of classical rational understanding with the Christian mystical practice. And it's a very important paradigm shift that happens during the Gothic period. And we do, interestingly, see it reflected in architecture as well, and we'll look at that probably more tomorrow. Here I am showing you what is considered the first Gothic building. This is Saint Denis. This is the choir, which was built in the 12th century. And it represents the three main characteristics of Gothic architecture, which I've listed here for you. We see high spaces filled with light. We also see the use of a ribbed vaulting with now pointed arches. And also we will learn about flying buttresses that are going to support these buildings from outside. The Gothic style, as we see it first articulated in Saint Denis, is going to emerge at the same time that monarchs begin to gain power, particularly in France. And this church is going to be important to the French kings. It is the personal church of the French king. It is the dedicated to Saint Denis, which is the patron saint of France, and will be where all French royalty is buried. At the time, in 1130, it was overseen by a very powerful and sophisticated bishop named Abbot Suger, which is spelled like sugar, S-U-G-E-R. Abbot Suger, who was a Benedictine monk who was educated at Saint Denis, and is going to develop very successful, strong relationships with the royal family. During his education there, he is going to read the writings of Saint Denis and his treatises. Saint Denis was particularly interested in the concept of mathematical harmony and believed that light would reveal the presence of God. And this is something that is going to be very influential on Abbot Suger, who is accredited with designing and overseeing the building of this choir, which is considered the first Gothic work. Here is the actual choir and a plan of it. As you can see, it is exceptionally light and exceptionally open, right? We have now, instead of those huge compound piers that we see in the Romanesque churches, just simple singular columns, and you'll recognize here Corinthian order will be placed here at different intervals, and this alone will be enough to support the now ribbed growing vaults with the pointed arches above. This, of course, allows for you to see across the choir from one end to the other. It also is going to allow for a tremendous amount of light here to enter into the room. We know that the ribbed vaulting system developed in the Romanesque. We've seen it in Saint Etienne. But what we're going to see now is a more pointy arch. And of course, the pointed arch are going to be able to channel the weight of the vaults more directly downward than the semicircular arches. Therefore, we're going to see less buttressing required to hold them in place. Thus, just that skinny column holding them up, opening the walls, allowing for light and empty space to enter in. Abbot Suger, and of course the search for light is central to his kind of understanding of creating environments that are fused with the presence of God. As we can see here is the older Romanesque nave, and we look through the opening and we can see just how different in contrast that choir is, so open, so light-filled. Suger and his contemporaries marveled at the wonderful uninterrupted light, which they called, or Abbot Suger called, lux nova, or new light. The light of the church served as a metaphor for divine light, and he saw that this light could then be, of course, used to illuminate the spirit and unite one with God and the concept of divine luminosity. And this was very important to his kind of understanding of Christianity and what he was trying to achieve in these churches. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the Nova video called Building the Great Cathedrals, because they do a really good job at kind of explaining some of the technical aspects of this. And this is something I want you to answer this question, but because we're running out of time in our class, I don't want to take it from you. I want you to keep it with you, okay? So do a good job taking notes on this. It will be very helpful for you, I promise, understanding Gothic architecture and, thus helpful for you on the test. Yeah. I can make a link to it, yeah. But I want everyone to watch it, so that's why we're taking class time. And then we'll talk about it tomorrow, and we'll talk about Chartres Cathedral as well. Okay, let me go back.